Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gemini Rising, and I'm Ann Wolke, and today I'm here with my lovely Gemini Rising co-host, Natalie Sady, and also our wonderful Gemini Rising guest today, Gemini Brett, Earth Astrologer extraordinaire, recent new father, and very deep intellectual human being. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you today. So welcome, Brett.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to see where we'll go.
Yeah, me too. So we had planned to do this last week, and both Natalie and I came down with the flu. So here we are now. And as we were getting ready for this today, the first thing I thought was, did we get the flu because we're Gemini risings? No, but we're also on the Aries Libra axis. So what was hitting us? What was hitting us, Brett?
So what do you mean by you're on the Aries Libra axis?
She's an Aries, I'm a Libra, and we're both.
Oh, got it. So yeah, eclipse time.
Yes.
And Anne and I are obviously polar opposites, and yet the Gemini rising makes us so similar. I love our chart. I feel like we're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Do you feel that one of you does this more in a kind of ninth-ish way and the other more in a third-ish way?
I feel like I do everything.
It used to be 11 and 5. Let me rewind that, because when Gemini is rising, Aries is on the 11th and Libra's on the 5th. So is one of you more kind of connected to the community side and one more the creative side?
I think so. What do you think, Natalie? I mean, you're always the social media one, right? Well, and then I'm the one that does the intro and that sort of thing.
This is true. It's so funny because I'm still healing from this flu that we have both had. I feel like I still have flu brain. So when you were asking the question, I was thinking literally, I'm like, which one of us would be more connected to the community? But you're right. We have our roles, and you're there. I mean, you created that incredible intro. You come up with all the thumbnails, not only for this, but for my oracle card readings and all of that. So yeah, we definitely are playing these parts, and we definitely have our jobs in all of this.
Mm-hmm. But I've always wondered also, though, because Natalie was obviously, people probably understand she was born in a different part of the world than me. So, but she was born in Australia. I was born in the United States. So seasonally, we are both fall babies. And I think that's interesting too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fun. This morning I was driving the kid to school. We were talking about equinox and getting into the signs. I'm going to go back and forth with him of me bringing astrology into his world or not. But we had a really fun discussion about Aries and Libra and 1 and the 2 and fun mystical subjects. So I love finding ways to share astrology with young folks, so we're not scaring them away, but just giving them a little bit so they get more and more interested,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's very important. One of the things that I really enjoy so much about your work is that you're always looking at the astronomy, really, right? And looking for, I love that you do this starry telling hour. Mm. And so you're looking at the astronomy for the stories that can teach us how to navigate our lives. And to me, I feel that that would be compelling also for children. But all of us need more stories in our lives.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the starry stories brought a lot of us out there, and we haven't connected them in yet, And then the astronomy piece, it's fascinating, right? Like, why is Aries still Aries in Australia, right? Like, that great question is a wonderful one, because we know that tropical signs anyway are not constellational. They can't be seasonal if Aries is still Aries in Australia, if you're not flipping around. And some people suggest we should. I'm not one of them, because if you did, you'd have to make a zodiac for Hawaii that's different than London anyway, right? Like we have very different experiences of seasonal energies, even from different places in the same hemisphere. So I've long been asking this question, like, well, what the heck is the zodiac? Like, if it's not constellations, and it's definitely not, especially if you practice with the tropical zodiac, and it's not seasons, then what is it? And that opens up a whole other really fantastic adventure. So, but I think it's driven by like the part of me that loves the materialistic side, like things that I can point my finger to in the sky, even more than the symbolic side. And then some of it's, for me, I always say it like this: astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And when we re-nature our astrology by reconnecting to the living sky, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use, right? And so there's something about astrologizing, like figuring out, like, what is this thing? Like this week, more than others, I've connected with people who are like level 3 astrologers in one school or another, one school. And they didn't even know that the ascendant, descendant axis was the ground. And it's like, it was hard for me to not just be like, really, or spit my tea on my keyboard. But it's like, wow, so this thing, it's just pure symbolism too. Like there's no actual structure, right? And so I really want to help people like reconnect to the chart, not only as a map of the soul, but as a map of the sky. Like when you were born, where you were born, and like that's what makes it you, right? And so as we, again, reconnect, and we get to understand like why these signs do what they do, why these houses do what they do. And that's like a lifelong journey. I'll never crack the code completely, but I get myself out, it's like sitting on a mountain watching the sunrise, and it's like, oh, that's why the 12th house is hidden things, or just like these simple like discoveries, which aren't discoveries at all. But I then have a physical, embodied, and very personal experience of things in the astrological code that, I could have just taken somebody else's rules and said, okay, that's how it works because they told me so. But I'm just not inclined that way. And I bet neither of you are either.
No, I'm not.
No. But so I have a question, talking about how you relate to the astrology and wanting to bring it back to the chart and away from the symbolism. Can we just go back one step? What is an earth astrologer?
Well, I mean, it's celebrating the most important planet. So what's the most important planet on the chart? And we born with Gemini in the rise might say Mercury, like very quickly, obviously like modern astrology would say the sun. Is there anything else but your sun sign? And as we know, yes. And one of you was born by day and one of you was born by night, right? And so at nighttime, we might even be more interested in the moon. But I would suggest the most important of the planets in the chart is the one that's at the very center of the chart, and it's called Earth. Like the one that is turning us, And so that's it. Like, if we, regardless of the seasonal experience, for example, as the sun moves through the signs, or let's say like moon at this time in the lunar standstill cycle is getting ridiculously high above the ground every month, and also ridiculously low every month. And when it's low here in California, it's super high in Australia, right? So, but like just having a personal experience of these things happening and like seeing what it does in the body mind, like helps us take astrology out of like a mental space alone, bring it into the physical, and in between, of course, is the realm of the heart. So the astrology will be more of a way in, rather than like the pitfall is a way out, where we're just blaming our idiosyncrasies on our chart, or saying like, oh, nothing's going to happen for me this year anyway, or like those kinds of things. We want astrology to be a way in, and for me, that's just a method. And it's weird because I've never been too much of an embodied person. I live in the kind of thought realms more than most. But as I look to the skies, it helps me, I guess, understand more of where I'm looking from. And it helps me become more of an earthling. you know, and I think celebrating that marriage of the above and below, of heaven and earth, is what it's about. And then, you know, the fun, wonderful truth is like we're actually measuring in geocentric astrology, which is 99.9% of the charts that people use. We're not even measuring planets from the surface where we live or where we were born. We measure planets from the center of the earth. And that's a very beautiful thing, you know, like some people will come and say, well, like how Jupiter has no effect on you. And it's like, well, does Jupiter have any effect on the earth, sir? Well, I'm on Earth. And so as Earth is Jupiter, so am I. And so are all the people and the squirrels and the birds and the flowers on this planet. You know, so that's the point of astrology. It's like really forming an intimate relationship with our planet and then meeting through that relationship, her relationships with the other planets. See what I mean? I mean, really astrology, and especially I would suggest tropical astrology, which is the Earth zodiac. It's Earth astrology anyway.
Can I just add one question to this? Because you were talking about watching the stars and actually looking at the physical as well as having the deeper connection. Do you have a favorite place that you have visited so far to stargaze?
Yeah, probably Hawaii. I lived in Seattle for 17 years. That's actually where I became a sky guy, which is ironic. And I remember I met Rick Levine at a party one time, and I didn't like know about astrologers. I was just coming into astrology. People were like, hey, you need to meet Rick. And I was like, all right, cool. And I asked Rick, I was like, hey man, where's a good place to do some stargazing around here? So he's like, oh, there's this great place down south. It's called Arizona. And fortunately, I took his word for it. And so Sedona is like definitely top of the list. Just being in those power places, being around typically really amazing people who live there, and being in a place where like I'm not completely out in the desert, but can see, you know, the river of stars that is the Milky Way. I like Hawaii because no tarantulas and rattlesnakes, and it's Hawaii. So when I lived in Seattle, that was kind of, I don't know, 3 times a year of my own just pilgrimages to go connect to the stars. It's pretty easy to fly from Seattle over to Hawaii in this great gift of the dawning Aquarian age in which we live. And I just go out there and maybe do a workshop or maybe not. And, you know, sometimes get up on the volcano, right? Get a little closer to the stars. But the nice thing about Hawaii, like you can just lay on the beach and the sky is so open. Other places that I found my way to over time, like one of them is at the Four Corners. So where Arizona and Utah and New Mexico and Colorado all connect, called the Hoven Weep. That's a very beautiful, sacred place. There's not much there. It's like $10 camping spot with good bathrooms, by the way. But like there's old ruins there, and they're like, you know, astronomically aligned. And nobody's ever there. So you can kind of get out and about in the middle of the night. And the Milky Way, it's like you're in it when you're walking around that place. And there's just something old and sacred. So I tend towards places where there's a rich and ancient tradition of a heaven-earth marriage. Because when we like Hawaii has many, many sacred sites of star teaching, right? And when you just get there, and especially at night, right, you're just like more likely to experience some of the old code. But I had my first just completely wild astro experience in the Southern Hemisphere. Actually, I was in Peru, and Jupiter spoke to me when Jupiter was last in Gemini, actually 12 years ago. And that just turned me on. And like, he's like, time to get to work. I was like, all right. So I'm all over anywhere I go. And a thing that I love to experience is how the sky shifts when you're gazing from one place on Earth versus another. Right. So like Yulia at the Cosmic Intelligence Agency brought me down to Australia to teach in Melbourne some years ago. And just getting there and watching Orion flip, you know, what we would consider upside down from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, and watching the sun travel counterclockwise through the sky by day and other things, and just kind of, you know, like getting it flipped around now that I've learned how to look more, I love it. And yeah, I have a feeling, or I like to brag about this, like you could blindfold me, drug me, drop me out of a plane, and I can tell you where on earth I am just by looking at the night sky. And that helps you crack out of things like, oh, the flat earth program and stuff. Once you learn how the sky works and you travel around earth, you really get to experience the shape and the body of earth by relating to the heavens from different places on her surface.
So I've got a couple things to say here. First of all, I love that you pronounce Melbourne correctly, not Melbourne.
I was corrected once.
I love when I hear someone from the US say it the way we say it, where we're from. And I want to ask you the same question, because I'm going to just share my favorite place to stargaze, because I always think this is an interesting topic because everybody has a different perspective. I have two. One was at the Grand Canyon. Some friends and I drove out. We misjudged timing, and so we got to the southern rim right on sunset. So we watched the sunset, and then we just sat there and grounded for a while. And then once our eyes adjusted to the sheer darkness, we sat there for hours just watching because there was no light pollution. And then when we were heading back to the car, we ran into some guys who were documentary filmmakers. And then we spent another few hours just stargazing because it was just magical, and talking about all the things about how different the sky is, whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere, all of that. With that being said, my absolute favorite place is in northwestern Australia. There's a town called Broome, which is where 80% of the world's pearls come from. And normally when people go, they stay at Cable Beach or somewhere close to Cable Beach, which is magnificent. And the stargazing there is really wonderful. However, the last time I was there, several years before, I'd filmed a reality show, and we had gone about an hour and a half out of Broome proper, and we stayed on a cattle station, and there's a resort there, but it's limited with people, all of that. The road to get to where you're going on the property is about 6 miles from the main road, and there's no lights or anything like that. When we hired our car, because I'd said to my sister, let's go and stay there for a little bit. There's nothing to do there. It's like you're on a private beach. It's magnificent. So we're driving out. The rental car company said, we suggest you don't drive at night because if you hit anything, you're not covered. And we went, no, we're going. It's fine. We'll be fine. And we were. But we're on this 6 mile stretch of driveway essentially. And I noticed the sky. And so I pulled over, or rather I stopped the car in the middle of the road, turned the car off and said to my sister, get out of the car. And she thinks I'm throwing her out for no reason. And I'm saying to her, trust me, please get out of the car. And she's like, what? I said, I'm getting out as well. Just get out of the car. So we get out, we walk to the front of the car, and I said, hold my hands. So we held hands, and she's like, you're so weird. You need to stop doing this. And then I said, look up at the sky. And there was the entire Milky Way. And it was just, the colors were so bright. Like I have never seen it like this before. It was as if we could reach out and touch it and climb into it. And it was the most magical thing that each night when we were there, I think for 4 nights, every night when we were leaving sort of the main area of this resort to go back to our cabin, we would just walk like that, just staring at this magnificent that was above us. And I think frequently about going back because it is my absolute favorite place to be. So I just needed to share that because at some point, Brett, you need to get out there and go and see the stars in Broome. I think you would just so appreciate it. But Anne, where is yours?
Mine is not going to be as glorious and amazing as that. I feel like, I grew up in the Mojave Desert, and so stargazing has always just been part of my life, not at nighttime, staring up at the stars and being able to grow up in a place where it's a wide open space without a lot of trees, many clear nights. And when I was growing up, a lot less light pollution than there is there now. And I will never forget being in a college astronomy class. I think I talked about this already once, Natalie, on an episode of Gemini Rising, that we went out to someone's home built astronomy or observatory out in the middle of nowhere, and we got to take a photograph of a star, and we had to plot it out and then be able to do the calculations with the telescope and follow it along so that we could take this really great exposure of a star. And, I mean, to me, that was an amazing experience to be able to actually use film, right? So it wasn't a digital photograph. We were using film, and to then be able to calculate how much light is actually coming in through the device of the telescope and how much are we moving so that we have to move the whole thing. It was an amazing exercise, and something like that where you're able to see the stars, but then also experience what they're doing with somebody who knows what's happening is an amazing experience. I love that.
Can I show you a couple images?
Sure. Do I have to do anything for you to share, or are you able to?
Is this on your screen?
There.
Yep.
Then no.
Okay.
This was Hawaii in April.
Which island were you on?
This is in Maui in the lava fields near Makena. And so I'm like in pitch black, crawling out, not crawling actually, very safely and slowly walking out on very spiky lava and finding a place to lay down. But here's a question for the two of you. What zone of the zodiac are we looking at?
Oh, you're testing
And feel
me.
free to
I
say
don't have my glasses,
okay.
but I have to make it bigger here.
Oh, that's actually.
What do you think, Natalie? I can't.
I am making it bigger as well.
I can't really tell.
Do you see the Milky Way?
Yes.
This is the problem, and it's one constellation that sits in the Milky Way, and I should know what it is.
Well, I mean, just the Milky Way, that's the galactic center.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the only thing in the sky that will ever look like that. It's the galactic bulge. It's where the Ouroboros, this cosmic serpent, bites its own tail, right? And it's literally what we believe now to be the black hole, white hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, the sun of our sun, right? So, I mean, interesting though, and I can probably trace this. This is the Scorpius constellation, which in Hawaii they know as Maui's fishhook.
That was going to be my guess, and I doubted myself.
And then here's the Archer. Well, so once you see a galactic center, it's the tail, the stinger of the Scorpion, and the arrow of the Archer point to the center of the galaxy. Also the knee of Ophiuchus, right? And so, I mean, a cool thing, another favorite stargazing place for me is my backyard. And I don't see any of that. Like San Francisco's that way, Oakland's that way. It's a very light polluted place where I live. Not quite as much as LA, but pretty much, But so I can't ever see the galactic center here. I can't see the Milky Way band, but I can see the tail of the Scorpion and the arrow of the Archer. And so I know where to align my heart to that place. And we Gemini rising folks should have a good relationship with it because galactic center is setting in a Gemini rising chart, So we're like literally designed to form relationship to that side of the space. I mean, that night when I was gazing in this place, I was having these really dark thoughts, frankly. Our baby hadn't been born yet, and I was really worrying about her birth and all these thoughts of death and whatnot, and just generally speaking about how crazy am I going to be bringing a child into the mad world at this time. This is actually the 8th house in my chart. So at one point I was like, well, it's something about like this spiky volcanic lava on which I'm standing. Like, imagine what it's been through to get like this, and that was true. Like, it's all about the earth and heaven. So I was like, wait, I'm staring into my 8th house. And so I was like, let me just look over here to the 5th house, or the stars that were in the 5th when I was born. Like, it's really nice to start learning the sky and learning to see not only the chart of the moment when you're outside, right? This is something I train people, like you can learn to see the angles, like, just by looking at the sky, right? You can learn the chart of the moment. We can see it. We can't see Neptune or whatever, but we can see the visible planets that are available at the time. We can see the angles of the chart. We can create charts. And it's really helpful when you have that experience of learning to see the chart of the moment in the sky, because it helps you bring more of the sky into the chart. And it helps the chart come alive and, again, break out of just some kind of code of math equations and rules, but it's also really helpful to know, like when I was born, like tomorrow's eclipse, it's very close to where Pluto was when I was born. And if I know the stars, right, where that planet was, or Mercury for me was very close, like I can go to the stars. And even though Mercury might not be at Porma where Mercury was when I was born, I can go to that star and just, like, if I need Mercury messages, or if I need to do some healing in that particular regard of my chart, like that's a place where I can be. Let me show you one other image. So this is from Hovenweep, the place I was talking about before. And this is like, what the sky looks like there. It's so amazing.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you notice anything in this image? Are you familiar with anything that you see here?
Well, those bigger stars, are they planets? Is that Jupiter and Mars, maybe?
One of those is a planet. One of those is Mars. One of them's a star.
There's just so many stars. There's so many in this picture that it's hard, because the ones we would normally use as the guideposts aren't there. It's not the Pleiades on the top left.
This is
middle,
the Pleiades here.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Taurus.
And when you see the bull constellation, but the sign of Gemini, in our day and age, the Pleiades mark the cusp between tropical Taurus and Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see, for example, that this means Mars, who is here, had just entered Gemini. Mm-hmm. This is Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, right? And this is the bull's horns.
So is Gemini the two stars, that one sort of stuck in the top of the tree branch and the other one directly above it? Is that Gemini, or no? Do I have it wrong?
No, this is, the tree is hiding Capella. The twins aren't up yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're kind of behind this tree. But when we see the Pleiades rising, when we see the bull rising, like that's my rising star, Aldebaran, and it's confusing about tropical zodiac, right? Like the signs are not constellational at all. In our day and age, Aldebaran, like this year, is at 10 degrees tropical Gemini, and the Pleiades at 1. But if you're outside and you see the Pleiades rising in the east, know that Gemini is rising. So the Gemini Rising show, there you go, right? Like Aldebaran was at the horizon when I was born, but the Pleiades were above and visible. So it's typically like the Pleiades for me when I'm out and about and I see the Pleiades rising. I'm like, oh, well, like this is my moment, like this is the sky is currently configured similar to how it was when I was born. And it can't be exactly, because I was born in Boston, further north than where I live in the Bay Area of California.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets close, And now my relationship with the Pleiades, which has always evolved since I've become a sky guy and learning from many different teachers around the world. We named our daughter Maya after one of the 7 sisters of one of the Pleiades. So there's a whole other thing that's happening there with them for me now.
And I think I mentioned this, that my daughter's name is Maya also. Maia. But the interesting thing is that when choosing her name, I wasn't as knowledgeable about astrology or astronomy, and I just knew, I prefer the Greek spelling of Maya, and I like the figure of Maya, not thinking about the fact that she's a Pleiadian, and that my rising is very close as well to that area of the sky, and she's the mother of Hermes, right? Isn't that in the tradition?
And the story of his becoming is a complete astronomical story. So Maya, or Maia, maybe, which probably Maria comes from, and many of the words like Ma, Mar, mother, Mary, mater. The month of May is named for Maya. And we live on May Road here, actually, which is fun.
Funny.
But yeah, the story goes that she left her heavenly abode to live in a cave here on Earth, and where was it? Mount Kalini, I think, in the Arctis mountains, which are named for Arctis, like Arcturus, who himself. Do you know the story of I almost said Callisto? Is it? Yeah, Callisto, his mother who's turned into the bear. Okay, so these tales, like, they can really bring the sky to life for you, right? So yeah, Jupiter or Zeus, who seems to sleep with everything that moves, had a romp with a woman in the mountains, and when Hera finds out about it, it said that she turned her into a bear. And there was a time when her son, who was raised by Maya, because he was without a mother, he had become a great hunter, and he was out in the woods hunting, and he heard this bear, and, roar, who was saying, "I love you," but he heard roar, right? And so he strings his bow, and he's just about to kill, unknowingly, his own mother. But it said that's when Zeus threw her up into the sky as what we now know as the Big Bear, Ursa Major, right? Big Dipper's part of that. And then some say he was thrown in as the Little Dipper, as Ursa Minor, the little bear. They travel together through the sky. Or that he's Arcturus, which in some traditions is known as the bear keeper. Because if you look at the Big Dipper, right, which is part of the bear, you can use two of the stars to point to Polaris, so you know where North Pole is. But in the other direction, if you follow the arc of the stars at the handle of the Dipper, it points to Arcturus. We say follow the arc to Arcturus. It's a powerful one of the Bohemian stars of Mercury. But the story of Hermes' birth, which, I don't want to take our whole time together telling it, but Maya goes to the cave. So what would it be for the Pleiades to be in the cave? And it happens every year. And the answer is when the sun meets the Pleiades, right? Because they go under the beams. There's a time when the Pleiades are an evening star, and we see them after the sun sets, right? And then the sun comes and eats the Pleiades, and then they're reborn sometime after with their heliacal rise in the east, right? And that was like, you go all the way back to like Working Days by Hesiod. That's like one of the key kind of agricultural timings of the year, like what the Pleiades are doing. So the Pleiades will rise and set every day, but they also have their heliacal setting, the time every year when the sun comes to eat them, and then their heliacal rising, the time when they escape the beams of the sun, are reborn as morning stars, right? So for me, Maya coming to live in a cave, that's telling us about the Pleiades under the beams of the sun, and then Zeus visits her there. Like for Ovid, it's like Jupiter away from the ever watchful gaze of Juno, like comes to visit Maya in the cave, and then out comes Hermes. So what would that be? That's Sun conjunct Jupiter conjunct Pleiades. Right? And then Mercury comes out. He's on the evening star side. And then in that tale, it's the first day of Hermes' life. He steals Apollo's cows. He walks them backwards in their own hoof prints, right? So that's Mercury retrograde in the bull. And the Pleiades are on the bull's back, right? And then Apollo takes Hermes up to talk to Daddy Zeus or Jupiter, who now, right? So it's Sun, Jupiter, Pleiades. The sun passes them by. Jupiter is reborn as a morning star. Mercury's retrograde as an evening star. He pops out in the morning side. And it's Apollo, the sun, taking Mercury up to see Jupiter, right? So we learn to like decode the astronomy in the myths, and it's all over the place. Like you can actually find out when that tale was written. Because that doesn't happen much, right? Like that astronomy I just described. There's much more in the story that show you other little intricate pieces, or like if you're familiar with the story of Inanna and Inanna's descent into the underworld and her death and rebirth and return, like that is how the Venus cycle works. The Sun-Venus cycle, right? Or Venus-Sun cycle from Earth's point of view. And that's like the Sumerians called Venus Inanna. And there's so many things like this. Like there's tales of Orion because of his shady character doing shady stuff. Like he was blinded at one point. And see, that's, for me, it's the same thing. The sun comes and blinds us from the ability to see Orion every year. It takes Orion under the beams. Right? At this time, that's like the sun ingressing Cancer. And then Orion in the tail, he needs to find a young one who takes him east to see through his now blind eyes the rising sun, and his sight is returned to him. That's the heliacal rise of Orion. Or like in Australia, here in the Americas, as we call them now, some native traditions. For the Greek, there's so many tales about Orion chasing the Pleiades through the sky.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what Orion does. You know what I mean? And so I love this tales because there's just such a magic, like it's so, I don't know, it's so romantic when you get out and you just speak to the sky in that way and listen to those stories, and especially when you listen to the stories of many lands. But you also feel that kind of energetic imprint of constellations, of stars, and otherwise also of signs, which are very different things. And I don't know, it kind of brings the chart to life. So in my client work, like we're typically more in the code of astrology and more of kind of the symbolic side of dispositorship and who's the steersman of the chart and all the things. And people are asking about relationships and work and, but eventually when I'm working with people, I would love to bring them into the constellational imagery of their moment, right? And bring more of the stars into the chart. Because it just comes alive in a different way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that it's it's obviously something that for so many years, for all of our history, until very recently, people have been so connected to the world around them and using the stars as the guideposts and as the metaphors and these figures that we pin a lot of our stories on. And you can see how powerful it is to kind of keep people away from that now. And the church over centuries, right, always kind of tried to harness a lot of stories from the natural world, from traditions that had existed before Christianity, for example. But there's not as much that they've done with all of the all of the astronomy, I should say, right? That they took some key figures and then brought that into Christianity, but not everything. So that's one thing I wanted to notice. But then the other thing I was thinking of is how many locations are built along astronomical lines that you mentioned earlier, having been to one of the sacred areas that you were going to view the sky, and something there was built along astrology, along the lines of the equinox. I don't remember what it was that you had mentioned.
I think I was speaking about Heiaus in Hawaii. Like there's many sacred stone sites and they're known to be teaching sites. Like not all of them were sky teaching sites, but many of them were. And and then just around the world, places with equinox, with solstice alignments, places with Sirius alignments, which won't work now like they once did. Right. I want to show you another image here. This is a time when the constellations were Christianized. So that's the southern hemisphere sky. So this was Julius Schiller. I think it was the late 17th century. Like tried to rub the pagan off of the constellations.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Right. So like the Ark here, that's Argo, right? Jason and the Argonauts ship, which is very prominent, especially in the southern hemisphere. This would be the Southern Cross here. And I think they did the Old Testament in connection with equatorial constellations, and the New Testament connected with ecliptic constellations. So the zodiac, I'm not sure if that's true, but a really interesting one is this. Let me show you the other point of view. I think it's this. No, that's what we were just looking at, right? Hold on, let me see. Oh yeah, let me get to the other. Buttons, so many buttons. Is it this? Yeah. So, I mean, sadly, they turned like the Isis star, which is Sirius, into a rug. But here we get like apostles, I believe. But I would also say, really importantly, this is Saint Joseph. All right. Well, so like, the father, not father of Christ.
Which one was Joseph?
What's that? It's Orion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so if you know the tales from Kemet, the land we now call Egypt, right? The stars that you and I know as Orion, that's Osiris or Asur. Right. And so after he died, he was sent through the Duat, through the underworld experience, and then became those stars in the sky. And then later his queen, his sister, his consort, Isis, would become the star Sothis, or the star we call Sirius, right? And they travel together. And then the question is, well, where is their child? Because in the tale, like his brother Set kills him. He actually kills him twice. The first time he's resuscitated by Isis after a story that's very similar to the Demeter Persephone story. So the next time Set, like he's not playing around, just cuts him up into 14 pieces. And it said those pieces were scattered throughout Egypt. And then Isis and Anubis and Nephthys and Thoth went looking for them. And every place they found one of these pieces of Osiris, they consecrated one of the great temples of Egypt. But they didn't find a very important piece, which is a piece necessary to make a hair, right? And so what happened there is Jehuti or Thoth creates this golden phallus for Osiris. And Isis turns herself into a falcon and flies above it, and she becomes immaculately conceived, right? Like impregnated. And that was Horus. So Horus, her child, or Heru, the Avenger, right, is here to avenge his father's death. And that said, that happens every day at sunrise. The sun rises and light conquers night. But then Uncle Set wins every night when the sun sets, which is why we call it sunset, by the way. It's named after Set, the brother of Osiris. Right. But if you think of that, like where that is in the heavens, like what we know as Orion's sword, many of us, are the 3 stars beneath Orion's belt stars. That's actually the Orion Nebula. And it's the birthplace of stars that's closest to the Earth. Modern astronomy doesn't believe it's old enough for our sun to have been born there. I think the stories are pretty clear. That because the Egyptians didn't in any way hide the truth that Horus was the sun in our sky. Okay, so later that would be called the Christ, who was also born through immaculate conception, right? And so I love in the Julius Schiller, first of all, they used the Christ image was the sun, Mary the moon, right? Mother Mary the moon, and then Saint Joseph, Orion, which really is keeping that ancient esoteric thread. I mean, I haven't read any stuff from Schiller. I've just seen this in the Solarius star maps, which kind of you would love, Anne, because they take the kind of the way that the images of the sky have evolved throughout history, mostly in like Western history, I should say. And so like the Christianization of the heavens, like that didn't really stick, thankfully, but it held for a minute, right? But they're really clearly showing us, I think, not only that the sun, that Christ is the sun in the sky, like he told us, right? Traveling through the 12 signs, who's at the 12 apostles. Like a Gemini Rising show, we should know that Thomas means twins. His name was Didymus Thomas, and Didymus means twins in another language. So that's the guy we call Gemini, right? And that the son is born of Saint Joseph, kind of, and that's Orion. So in other traditions, like for the Maya, the feet of Orion and one of the belt stars which surround the Orion Nebula, they're known as the hearthstones that surround the smoke of creation, right? And there's so many tales of creation coming from that place of the heavens. I think they're literally telling us that the sun, our sun, was born in the Orion Nebula. Astronomers would smack me for saying that. But I very much believe it to be true. Like, I think that the ancient tales, the old myths aren't just stories, I think they hold, including in like Mother Goose and the fairy tales, like really important esoteric codes that we've written into these constellational stories over time so that they could survive things like church burnings and the like.
Right.
So in a sense, I would suggest, though they would burn me at the stake for saying this, that the Christian story is the most astronomical story. It is the epic story of the sun moving through the 12 signs.
Mm-hmm.
Its dance with the many moons, the many Marys, right? There's 3 Marys at the crucifixion, which are the moon, the full moon, and the old moon, right? The maiden mother crone.
Mm-hmm. But I've often wondered, so they really emphasize the moon and the sun, the story between the moon and the sun, but the emphasis that other people across time have had on Venus, does that disappear, or is it folded into the story in a different way?
That's a really cool question. I mean, the Venus focus in many traditions doesn't seem like the way that we often learn Venus in modern astrology, right? Like so in Mesoamerica, like many of the Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan traditions connected with Venus. And like the heliacal rising of Venus was a time of war, it said. And it was seen like that retrograde Venus reborn as a morning star still had like blood on him. But it was also the shining ones. It was like those who came to bring us, culture. And then on the other side, like the evening star side, like Lolok, who's more of like a god of rain and nurturing, right? Even in the Greek tradition, like the old images of Venus, like there were many Aphrodites, for example. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, in the Christian thing, I don't know, the way that I know Venus, it would very much be Magdalene.
Mm.
I'm biased. I was born with Venus in Virgo, which, by the way, is said to be fallen Venus. And there's a reason why, like, morning star Venus was in Latin known as Lucifer, and why Lucifer is the fallen angel. That's all, I'm sure, astronomy, like morning star Venus astronomy, especially when in the signs of Virgo and Libra in the Northern Hemisphere view. And that's too long of a story to tell here. But, like Lucifer, for example, shows up one time in the Bible. And the way people tout that name around, you think it would be on every other page, right? And it was actually just a shit translation, part of my language, where they were trying to find some way to translate. I think the Hebrew, it said the son of the dawn. And Lucifer is the light bringer, right? Because Venus rises before the sun. So there's a lot of confusion there, right? But so Virgo Venus, for me, it's like that priestess essence of the goddess. And so for me, that's what Magdalene was. Mm-hmm. And then the way that the church itself has just cast all of this shame and shade on Magdalene, rather than revering her as this great like priestess and disciple and wife of Christ, right? Like, so I can see Venus there. I can see Venus in a different level in Mother Mary too. But it's hard, like, so once you start forming relationships with the planets, or I shouldn't speak for you, for me, like kind of casting gender onto them, character onto them, it helps for me relate to them, right? Because like I relate to humans, but then it can really kind of pigeonhole in you into a place where you can only cast Venus as feminine or something like that. And that's where like global traditions can help try to break you out of that a little bit. Like that's kind of where I'm at. It's hard for me not to see, oh, well, like Venus would have to be one of the Marys or something. It's like, why isn't it Judas? Right.
Why isn't it Judas? Right now.
And who is Judas, right? So yeah, I mean, like if Judas is one of the signs, is Judas Scorpio? So there's been like a lot of attempts over time of looking at like where the 12 tribes are in regards to the 12 signs the sun moves through, or looking at the 12 apostles. Is it the signs that the sun moves through? Can characters go to stars? I don't know. And then Gemini rising, let's respect Mercury, and you can kind of cast that being in any way, and it can be really helpful too.
What got you into astrology? Was it the astrology piqued your interest, and so then as you were learning, you started learning about all the mythology, or did the mythology come first and then it was a natural evolution to the astrology?
Astrology before mythology for me. Astronomy, maybe the first. I grew up in Las Vegas, right? It's like the criminal number 1 on light pollution list. And so I did not really have a relationship with the night sky. And we used to go out to the desert and party, and you don't have to go too far from like Vegas to see stars, but I don't really have any memories of experiencing stars in Vegas, maybe a couple. I was in Wisconsin and under the Milky Way in the summers a few times when I was a kid. That's like the first time I met the Milky Way, I think. But for me, plants led me to the planets, like plant medicine work. They helped me in a time when I was going through my own weirding process and kind of reached dark night, through acting like an asshole, maybe part of my language, but like really becoming something that I hated. Like I really, needed guidance. And fortunately, a dear one in my life was going through something similar at the time. And a guide had led her to the tarot. And she bought my first tarot deck for me. And that was kind of my gateway into astrology. And that didn't come around for a couple of years later, like people in my healing circle. And I was around really beautiful people who were so committed to their own kind of path of unfoldment at the time in my life. They all told me I should get a reading with Daniel Jamario, like 3 people in the same week. And I was like, yeah, I should do that. Right. And it was hard for me because I grew up, I was like a math kid, science kid. And so I believed what they told me in school, that astrology was just utter, nonsense, archaic, superstitious bullshit. And there's no reason why it should work. And so it took a while for me to like loosen up and crack through some of those codes. I thought I was open-minded. I was like a psychedelic, musician. But there was a lot of like rigid walls there. So it took a little while, and astrology found its way in. Like while I was on Daniel's waiting list, I read the Shamanic Astrology Handbook a couple of times. And that was the first time I realized I was anything but a Scorpio, right? Like I only knew about sun sign astrology then. I didn't know much about it. Like I was reading the Tarot Handbook by Angelus Arians and working with the Thoth, the Crowley deck, like with that handbook, which it's very different than Crowley. But anyway, she talks about like the decans and some other kind of like more interesting bits of astrology were starting to leak in through that. But then, yeah, when I had my session with Daniel, I actually had read his book enough time that I kind of read my chart to him using his techniques. And he's like corrected me in a few places, like, that's good. And then he told me a bunch of things that nobody should know about me. And you know how that is, right? So then I was pretty sold. And then I thought I was training in a very different regard when I went down to Peru for the end of the world in 2012. But I realized my first reading was right before then. I was in my Pluto square Pluto, my nodal return, like so many different things were happening for me astrologically. And I realized I was meant to be an astrologer, and Jupiter told me when I was down there, and I just kind of got to work. And that was like 12 years ago now. And then after that time, I remember buying Edith Hamilton's Mythology on the audiobook styles. I was driving around a lot back then. I would just drive around, listen to these myths. And I was like, wow, that's like a really beautiful way to express this particular part of a chart that I was learning. Later came to things I haven't read it too much. I have so many books on my shelves that look great, but I haven't read. But like mythic astrology, Ariel Gutman and Kenneth Johnson wrote that I've definitely flipped through. And I think this like ability to story the chart and to story our lives through the power of myths can be really helpful. I mean, you know how it is. I imagine you're both counseling astrologers too. Sometimes it's about what to say and what not to say, what not to say. Some things have to be said, but how to say them based on who we're saying them to. Right. And sometimes a myth vehicle can be like, I could tell a story about a goddess and the person doesn't even know I'm telling a story about him. And he's like, wow. And then it helps him connect some dots. And then he brings it into his own life. And instead of me just being like at your chart, okay, this happened to you when you were 8 years old. It's like, well, let me tell you this story. And it's like, wow, that sounds very similar to this thing that happened to me. And I feel like that invitation for somebody to reveal themselves through the session versus being told who they are just opens up much more of a flow between me and who I'm sitting with. And it's not something I excel at. I'm trying to get better at that. listening, you might already know here, is not my forte, right? But like myth can be this really beautiful Rosetta Stone between your language and mine, and opens up opportunities for us to get to know some of the hell on earth that we go to find heaven, and kind of the stories that we share, and like, you know, kind of like the root level.
And is everything, when you're giving somebody a reading, is everything based on what you see in the chart, or do you channel a portion of it?
Yeah, the latter. I don't know that I would call it channeling, but it's that. And usually, so these days, I sit with a lot of astrology students, and with some professional astrologers, right? Which is always such an honor. And so like, I say that because these days I have the chart on the screen more than I don't. When I'm sitting with somebody who doesn't speak astrology, I try not to speak astrology and just speak English. And so I'm gazing at their chart, you know, and kind of like these days it's all Zoom video. Like most of my clients are around the world and aren't here where I live. It used to be they'd come to my house, I'd make some tea. It's like a whole different thing, you know. But it's nice because now I can have the chart right here. Like I have a chart right here as we're talking, right? I'm gazing at that, but I'm looking at you, right? But yeah, these days the chart's often on the screen and we're looking at things and we're talking technique, and it's kind of, you know, and so clients will often hear like, you know what, I don't know where to see this in the chart, but I'm just clearly getting an image of Hawaii. And oh my gosh, because I've always wanted to go, or, you know, wow, my husband's from there, you know, those kinds of things will come through. Sometimes I'll use just like an example of a name, like I'll just tell some story and it's like, wow, that's my father's name, or, you know, so things come through. I'm a little bit more of like a Uranian channel than a Neptunian, if you will. Like I just work really quickly. And I'm kind of like a couple steps ahead in time, which is not always a gift, right? It's often, I would say it's more of a curse than a gift typically in normal life. It makes me impatient and such. But yeah, there's a lot. Like I'm not one of those astrologers who believes that we shouldn't utilize the intuitive gift in astrology. And in fact, the ancients spoke about this truth. Like the way that I describe it is that the astrology should be like a portal that opens up your intuitive gift. And for folks who really like have that strength of intuition, though I feel everyone should learn and utilize this great cosmic craft of astrology, it can really be a handicap. It can really slow you down. And I mean, you know how it is. Like once you get into electing charts for moments to launch a business or something, instead of just following our intuition like we used to, like now it's like, let me cast a chart. Let me cast a chart to figure out when I should cast a chart to figure out when I should, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like, so that again, like we want astrology to offer freedom and expansion. And sometimes it can be so constricting that it can be very difficult, right? So my students will study geometry, like our sister science, right? And in geometry, we have two tools. We have the rule, which makes lines, which you can measure. And we have the compass, which makes curves, which you cannot. And it speaks about measurable, immeasurable quantity and quality, right? Lines and curves, right? And so I'm always, in everything I'm doing, I'm attempting to be both. And so when I'm gravitated more like kind of linearly, like working through a chart, through a system and set of rules, it's like, well, how can I bring more curve to that? And if it's just all curvy, if I'm just completely like going with the gut, which I think is beautiful, it's like, well, how can I bring some more lines to that? Like, how can we find that balance? And I'm always, it's, you know, teaching people how to address a chart, like teaching them the rules and the linear stuff. Even that can be tricky because I honor that there's so many ways to pet a cosmic cat. There's so many different paradigms. Many of them even contradict. And I love grabbing from many different sources and kind of Gemini way to find my own voice. So that can be tricky, but at least it's like rules is rules. Like trying to help people open up into how to synthesize the stories of a chart and blend the many pieces together into something, you know, that tells the tale. That's really tricky to do because I do feel it's that kind of more intuitive faculty or the channel faculty or who knows, that lets us synthesize, right? Like the rules are like much more hunter and the other thing's much more kind of gatherer. And those things are trickier to teach. And so what I've done is I've found many different important doorways in my own initiatory path, like geometry being one of them, where it's like, well, let me just show you, like, let me show you how to draw the seed of life. And then I'll encourage you to do that 108 times and see what happens. Knowing that something's going to happen for them in their own language, that's like going to bring them to the findings in that particular temple that I could never express through my own words. Do you feel me?
Yeah. And because you talked about how those of us that learn how to read charts, we can start to rely on them a little bit too much versus going with our intuition, and it can be quite restrictive. So one of the questions that I had wanted to ask you, because I'm always curious with anyone that does astrology as to how they view this, because everybody has a very different opinion. We obviously have great transits that are really helpful and positive, and then there are the transits which are not so wonderful to navigate. They're the ones that are, giving us those big life lessons as we navigate these trickier moments in life. Do you feel that with astrology, we can transcend all of those difficult transits, so it becomes more about how we navigate a difficult moment in life versus going, this is going to suck because it's such a bad transit? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, what I'm feeling you're invoking here is the potential pitfall of astrology as a way out, right? So like, and people use this term like, oh, Saturn is hitting my sun right now. Like that's the most common term to describe a transit. It's like, be careful with your language. Like, why would you say Saturn is hitting your sun? First of all, that's not happening. Okay, like Saturn is actually visiting the degrees of the zodiac that hosted the sun at the moment of your birth. But how about Saturn is, inviting you to restructure your light, or Saturn is visiting your sun, or Saturn is initiating your sun, which is like that. That can be a trigger word, of course, initiate, but it does a lot more for me than hit. When Saturn is hitting my sun, then what can I do but like defend myself or just take the beat down? And like, that is not how I do astrology. However, how many times are we sitting with people who are really going through it? And I try to work with folks who, well, let me not say that. Like, I'm fortunate, very blessed to have a set of clients who are getting to know themselves and are unfolding and are committed to that process of, what's called the awakening. I prefer to say the awarening. And like, really, typically, 90% of my clients are like in the game. And so they understand that even like the bad cards we were dealt were the best ones, because you don't wake up from dreams, you wake up from nightmares. You know what I mean? And so I'm very blessed to have clients who typically are like, why is this happening for me? Instead of why is this happening to me and when does it end?
Right.
But, it's something that comes up sometimes in sessions. My kitschy response is like, when does it get better? No, it doesn't get better. You get better. And when you do, you probably won't want it to end, because you'll realize that this was the catalyst of your greatest growth. But, we have to honor and have an astrology that makes place for war, manipulation, betrayal, cheating, and such terrible things that we experience here incarnated in this weird world that I love so much, because it offers, in this appearance of time and space, a place where we can grow and make moves. And that's the only way spirit can, So I feel like, to be honest, I was reading a comment on the YouTube page as you asked that question that tried to Gemini beyond my capabilities. But I do feel like I'm maybe getting to the essence of it, is like, well, what do we do when folks are just feeling like the astrology is doing them? How can we encourage them to do the astrology instead? So Pluto Uranus transits, for example, or other timing activations, like they want change. And if you're not willing to bring offerings to the goddess of change at that time, good luck. Because it's likely going to have, the worst thing is you can miss out on it altogether. Like that's worse than feeling struck by the Uranian lightning, for example. But there's ways to do that through grace. So if you choose change before change chooses you, and that's like one of the great gifts of astrology, is like, hey, this storm's coming. You know, do you want to maybe consider like having some resources and maybe working a few less hours a week so you can take more time for yourself? You know, where do you find peace? Consider doing that more frequently. And more importantly, like as we all know, you know, annular solar eclipse tomorrow. It's very strongly aligned for my chart. I look at that, it's hard not to freak out. And then what good is astrology for us if it's just giving us the opportunity to freak out, but more specifically, right? Like, right? So we're freaking out anyway, because look around. But it's like, oh, well, I should freak out around my child, right? Or I should freak out around my partnership, or I should freak out around my community. It's like, so you can get more specific about your freak out, but is astrology really helping us help ourselves? Then we need to be very careful. And, you know, sometimes I'll have clients that come back and they're like, well, last time you told me this. And I'm just like, I would never, you know, did I say that? I used to, like, now I set my clients up to record sessions, but I used to record them on my end. And sometimes I'd go back and review the tapes. It's like, did I really say that terrible thing? And it's like, oh, I didn't. But I get why they heard it that way. So for one thing, like I should be more careful with my language because it's a really sensitive space when we come into sessions, especially if we choose to open ourselves to it on both sides, you know. But on another level, people hear what they need to hear. I had a session once with a 30-year-old girl. She was going through Saturn return. 30-year-old woman. When she turned 15 at Saturn opposition, her mother gave her the gift of taking her to the great astrologer in town, who proceeded to tell this 15-year-old girl that she would never know love. And so, I mean, I'll cry. It's so terrible. But so she's sitting with me, and I'm looking at her chart, and it was like, I can't remember everything, but like Venus was sitting on her descendant and was like really well favored in the chart. And I was just like, am I bad at astrology? Because I'm not seeing that at all. And I showed her what I saw. And, you know, she actually got married 9 months later and they're still together and happy. She's a regular client of mine. But I mean, I say this thing like, maybe that's what she needed to hear at the time. Because what she did is, knowing that love was not potential for her in her life, she really focused on her. And that led to her following her creative gift to an awesome career. And she's rocking it now. And so she didn't need another person. And that made space for somebody to come in like a really awesome equal partnership, which has been her case for 7 years now or something. You know, we all go through it in relationships. But I mean, I share that here in this weird tangential response to a question that I'm not sure you asked. Because I think it's really important to know that it's a sacred space when we're sharing astrology with others and with ourselves. So as we're studying this craft, it's very difficult to go into that portal and that oracle of astrology or pulling a card or whatever it may be, and to have reverence for like the softness of the soul who can be so easily terrified. Like I have an astrological printout from a very popular website that tells me that the last years of my life are going to be horrendous.
Oy.
And I'm still not yet mature enough to break out of my fear of them to the place where I'm consistently trying to invent stories of what's going to happen in my life that's going to make it terrible. What's going to happen in my life is I'm going to fucking make it terrible if I don't break that code, right? So it's a great challenge to me.
It's also...
Anyway, yeah, I feel like we really want to find ways to empower others and to empower ourselves to do astrology rather than astrology doing us. And there are other times where, as you know, it can be really helpful to just say, like, this is meant to be a pretty tricky time in your life. And so understand that there's like a beginning and a middle and an end of this initiation, and you're in the midst of it and you're doing really well. And the fact that you're experiencing this difficulty at this time right now, it's like the human in me hates it for you, but the astrologer in me loves it for you, because it tells me that you are dancing to the song of your soul as it's unfolding in real time. And there's like pristine, beautiful, tranquil waters on the other side of this tidal wave.
And I'm going to jump in just because you said something that triggered, ironically, a memory that came up last night for me when I was thinking about astrological readings and astrologers and all of that. So going back to the question that I'd asked, do you think we can transcend the transits? And I ask that because obviously there are people that are fatalists and go, no, this is what it is. And it is that Saturn's hitting my sun or whatever logic it is. I've always been of the belief that we look at these transits, and for me, I use it as a guide and go, okay, I'm having a really shitty day because I have this tough placement, but I just need to get through it. And to me, it's almost like going to an exercise class when you first start and you come out and you feel like you're dying and you say, does this get easier? And the best response I've ever heard is, it's not that it gets easier, it's that you get stronger. So it's all about leveling up. But so many years ago, I went and did a workshop with a medium, and she was from New Zealand, and it was a really interesting workshop, and it was one that taught me that I have to not let my conscious mind jump in when I'm channeling something, because I'm trying to make it make sense when it's not my job to do that. I'm just meant to transmit the information. And I had spoken to this woman after the fact. I don't know if I wanted to work with her privately or if I wanted a reading or whatever it was, but she said, listen, I actually can't do it on this trip, but you should speak to this particular woman. She does astrology. She does all these things. I'm staying with her. She's hosting me while I'm doing this tour, all of that. I was like, amazing. So I didn't know much about astrology at the time, but I went down and had a reading with this woman, and I drove several hours to get to her, and I'm sitting with her and she's going through my chart, and I don't remember much of what she said, but essentially she would have put together a chart on Astro Gold the way I can put a chart together. So just for your reference, Brett, when there's astrology things, I always defer to Anne, because I'm nowhere near where she is in her understanding of the astrology. I can look at things, but if friends call me and say, can you do a chart? I can have a brief look and tell them what I do see, but explain that there's so much I don't. And I do have the ability to run the Astro Gold sort of chart synopsis so that they can have an understanding of what's going on in their chart. It's not all of it, but that's it. But reflecting back, that's essentially what she gave me and what she went through with me. She was reading off this auto-generated chart. I give you that to give you the background to what she did to me next. So I've always worked in entertainment. I've done reality TV. I've modeled. I've done all these incredible things. And then the transition was naturally to sort of move towards TV hosting for me, which has ultimately ended up in journalism, because my Gemini mind is like, I have to know all the things. I was on a call with this woman at one point, and I'll never forget where I was. I was driving into one of the places that I worked at the time, and I was talking about my career. And this woman said to me, you will never be on TV. You will never, you are not meant to speak to people, and you need to understand and let all of that go. This is not what it is in your life. And then she talked about how she wanted to be a really successful medium or spiritual sort of guru, but she said, but that's not for me. And so I do this work by hosting people like this medium that we met at her workshop, and you need to let it all go and understand that you don't have a life like that. And I was so devastated that I walked into work and I was sobbing, and there was a wardrobe area where they laundered our uniforms and I had to change. I called my boss from in there sobbing, saying, I will be at work 15 minutes late because I have to pull myself together, because this woman, it felt like she ripped the rug from under me. to say, and she was hateful in what she was saying, which I didn't understand where this sort of venom was coming from. And she was so wrong. And everybody else that looks at my chart says you are doing exactly what it is you're meant to be doing. There's nothing else that has ever come up in any other reading or anybody else looking at my chart sort of saying this would be a great career for you. You're exactly where you're meant to be. And I very much followed my soul's calling. But I talk about this because I think there are some dark people, unfortunately, that get into these positions where they have people looking up to them for advice or guidance, and whether that be through tarot or oracle cards or astrological readings or anything in that field. And I think sadly, there are these people that can put these really negative ideas in people's heads. And then it becomes a matter of trying not to manifest that and speak it into existence because this person who we don't know has said something really, really terrible. And I think it's a test for us as we navigate this when we're going to people to, one, trust our gut to discern what is and is not correct, and two, learning not to hang on to these negative things. I mean, if I had have let this woman get in my head, I would have curled up in a ball and just given up on life.
Yeah, Anne, do you want to speak to that?
Do I want to speak to that? I've gotten really good over the last couple of years, especially at I don't even know how to explain it. I think I've always been good at knowing who I am and what I want to do and not letting voices outside myself get to me. But I feel like with the Gemini mind, right, with that thinking mind and so much air in my chart in general, if I hear somebody say something like that, Natalie, if I hear someone say, yeah, you'll never be this, actually, first, I'm oppositional automatically, and it would be, okay, no, I'm not. I would see the opposite, and it will still influence me in going in an opposite direction, right? So I have to disengage from from ideas like that, and I don't think it's very easy to do it. But I tend to doubt authority more, I think, than I wouldn't automatically trust someone who says that. I don't know what it is about me. I have that defiance. So that's all. That's my response to it.
I think for me, even when I do my oracle card readings, the way I explain things to people, even when you get cards which are a little tougher, and the October reading and then the reading I did for the week ahead, which I filmed last night, they were probably the most challenging sort of outlooks that I've pulled since I've started doing this. But I don't think that means everything's bad. It just means there are challenges because we're leveling up and we're learning new things. And for me, I think now I look at the delivery. If the delivery is, okay, we've got these challenges and there might be a few hurdles, but this is how you're doing it. And if it's coming from a place that seems to be of love or positivity or truth versus, I don't know why this person would have told this woman that she was never going to know love. And especially a 15-year-old, like you said before, there are some things that just shouldn't be spoken. You have to know, even if that's what you see. And whenever I reflect on this reading, I was coming off the heels of an abusive relationship. So I was rebuilding myself. So I was probably still a little vulnerable. And so getting hit with somebody saying something so horrible and so hateful, it knocked me around more than it probably would now. But this is where I think whenever I reflect on it, I always just get the same message that this was an incredibly jealous woman. She was jealous of the medium that she was hosting. I don't think she liked me very much, but I just wanted to highlight that there are, unfortunately, these people that their own feelings and things they're not able to disconnect from, and so it bleeds into what they're doing. So sorry, I didn't mean to commandeer the conversation there.
Yeah, I mean, I will also put in here that you're not only in television, you're also reading oracle cards. And you can have some great teachers suggest to you how to phrase things in such a way to be supportive and loving and tender. And you can have many great teachers do this. But probably the best teaching you had around that is that terrible woman who said such mean things to really deflate your energy around your dream. And interestingly, it's also opened up this whole other career that you do and been the best teacher for you of how to not do it, right?
Very
So
true.
if we can make it through those times, right, then it can be one of the most important, experiences. And experience is the only path to wisdom, So, yeah, I mean, it's just like life. These terrible things happen. Parents die, children die, right? Wars are happening, hurricanes, and the like, right? Why? And why come to a place where there's just such terrible things that go on? And probably the answer is to grow. And so we can have a relationship that just got terrible. We can have a reading that got or even started terrible. But when we also look back and learn to kind of love the experience and the catalyst that offered for our own growth, we can see the beautiful present wrapped in the ugly paper, and that's how life is, And so that's why that example I shared before kind of helped lead me to, it's kind of like not such a thing as a bad reading, but she never returned to that woman, obviously, and it's nice to know she was wrong, and obviously she was like projecting something terrible onto your chart, and it's hard not to do that in a relating experience in general and a counseling experience in general. And a lot of we counselors in the mystical fields have not really studied, counseling and some of the boundary development, as they teach it in the schools to psychologists these days and stuff. I mean, I think in some regards, it's nice to be free of some of those boundaries. Like people would say I should never share my own personal stories in a session with another person. I find that sometimes that helps us really relate. I find it also gives me an opportunity to say things like, hey, look, I'm seeing this, but it's very likely because I have something super similar in my chart and I experience it like this. So I just really want to warn you even more than at other times that I might be completely projecting myself and my experience in here. You know what I mean? And I like Robert Moss's dream language, where when somebody shares a dream with you, before you tell them what it was about, you don't. You say, if it was my dream, then. And I really attempt to, I can't say I'm perfect at it at all, far from by getting better. I attempt to honor that when I'm sitting with somebody's chart. It's like, oh, if this was my chart, right? Because we do have the code and the rules and astrology and all, but I've studied enough astrologies that completely contradict with one another. Like different charts are using different zodiacs, different paradigms, certainly different house systems. You know what I mean? Like describing planets and signs in completely different ways. So I don't believe personally, I always say this to my students, there should be as many astrologies as there are astrologers. Like you're going to find your own way, right? Just like you have your own language. Like my partner and I both speak English, but sometimes she's clearly telling me what she needs and I can't understand a word of it because I'm not her. And you know how that is in partnerships. We need to learn how to describe our needs in the other person's language. It's probably, by the way, for everyone super alive right now with the Libra Ring of Fire eclipse happening tomorrow. But that's how it is in a client session as well, right? And taking time to try to learn that person's language. And the nice thing in astrology is we have this chart that gives us a clue. Yeah, but honoring in every time, and I really try to say these things like, hey, please know that this is coming through this lens. And sometimes I'll see, by the way, that the way that I like to do a chart, like the system that I've developed, based upon like many different teachers and many different approaches. Like I'm a jazz musician. We just, you know, we like try to play like this person that we love. We try to play like this person and we stumble into our own voice accidentally. Like that's how it's been for me astrologically. And I try to help students have that kind of opportunity to find their astrology through it all. You know, I like to offer that in sessions, and sometimes I'll find that a chart really resonates with like a different model of astrology that I've been introduced to, but that's not my forte. And if that's what's going to work for them, I will just shift gears and do that. You know what I mean? And so much of this has to, and it's like perfect for the Gemini Rising show. Don't be dogmatic. Know that there are many ways to pet the cosmic cat, right? And if you get so married to the one and only way to do the wisdom tradition, like that might be more appropriate for some other signs. For Gemini, that shit is boring. And if life is not interesting when Gemini's on the rise, then it's probably not worth living. You know, so we should stay like interested and let wonder be the thread that helps us wander along the way, you know?
Oops, I'm muted. I love that. You know, I have 1,000 questions, obviously, but there's one thing that I've been wanting to ask, and it's, so we've been thinking about astrology from the perspective of a client astrologer relationship or people who really know a lot about astrology. So what I'm wondering is, Brett, because I know you've studied so much about many different traditions and also have your mathematical background and the music background. So I'm thinking about reaching people who, maybe the people who are non-believers. And I don't actually, that's not an appropriate way to use it. I don't think that astrology is something you believe in. I just think it is, right? But there are people who distrust astrology as a way to understand the universe. They think of, and they maybe are more literal minded or focused more on the astronomy. But sometimes you can't not see, the more you look at astronomy or the more you listen to certain types of music, the more you see connections of things coming together, the more you can't not see the divine, right? And so I'm wondering, Brett, what is there one particular astronomical phenomenon that you would talk to people about who are not believers, and just to tell them, hey, this is what happens, did you know it? And you think it would just blow them away and make them see, oh yes, something about the divine. What's one story that you might share with people?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I'm not sure how to answer it because I think it's so personal. Yeah, let me meander my way into something that might answer it.
Okay.
I mean, on one level, like go watch a total solar eclipse sometime and see what happens for you. Because it's just the most magical, intriguing, amazing, impossible thing you'll ever see. In regards to the skeptic or the one who's been conditioned by rational thought and was trained to believe that astrology is just archaic nonsense and there's no way that planets out there could have any effect on you and your experience as a human being. So like when you look at like the Neil deGrasse Tysons or the other gazillion rational scientists of our day and age have no open mind at all, which is a scary thing when it comes to science, who just say that like the tropical zodiac doesn't work at all because the signs aren't the constellations. They think the zodiac is constellations. So if they're starting there, and I love to prove to them what the zodiac is first and foremost astronomically, so they can at least get past that like straw man argument that astrology is fake because, like, Anne, you're born, the sun's in the sign of Libra, but it was certainly not in the scales constellation, right? Or I was born with the sun in the first degree of tropical Scorpio, in the sidereal charts, Libra, but it was in the Virgo constellation. So what am I? Do you know what I mean? And so like a lot of people, especially that we have the astronomy apps these days, really kind of, it falls apart when you're like, wait, these signs aren't constellations at all. And that just must mean it's wrong. It's like, no, that means it's different than what you thought it was. So what is it actually? And I spend tons of my time just contemplating, again, like it was retrograding back to the beginning of our flow. Like if the tropical signs, which I know work through experience, although I'm a very stringent skeptic myself. So astrology has to prove herself to me every day. And every day she does, because I sit with amazing people who are opening and blossoming kind of in accordance with the timings of their initiatory path that I'm hearing in their song of their chart, you know. And astrology proves herself as a very viable tool for experiencing growth as I move about in the world, right? But I do like to look at like actual framework. And so, for example, I've been in the room with astronomers who are just hating astrology. And if they'll give me enough time, and some have, not most, but some have, to show them what the tropical zodiac is, like a really wonderful thing is if there's no astronomy to the tropical zodiac, then why do you call that place 23.5 degrees south of Earth's equator the Tropic of Capricorn? Why wouldn't you call it the Tropic of Sagittarius? Now, many of you will say, well, what are you talking about? And so we're not going to go there right now. But there's really fun codes. Now, if Neil deGrasse Tyson got past that straw man argument and looked at what I'm actually doing as an astrologer, he's missing the opportunity to ridicule so much of what I do, because much of what I do is based in symbolism and is based in fractal times, like secondary progressions. We're turning days into years. What? Like zodiacal releasing, like where does that come from? That's different than a transit, which I can let's put my finger to, you know? But there's a lot of what I do that is definitely not at all like here in the material world, right? And I invite people there. So on that level, you know, so let me say another thing. Like if you want to tell me that astronomy has no contribution to my energetic experience as an earthling, I present day and night. Do you feel any different at 3 p.m. than you do at 3 a.m.? I think astronomy is contributing to your energetic experience as an earthling, and I literally don't have to give you more than 24 hours of an initiation for you to experience that deeply, and one more day for you to see how it repeats, and another day for you to see how it repeats again, and a year of those days for you to see how it repeats, but each one's a little bit different. Do you see what I mean? So there's two places I want to go here, so please journey with me. One is, we often hear that astronomy and astrology used to be the same thing, right? Because the astronomers of old were astrologers. The astrologers of old were astronomers. I'm excited to activate more of those people. Like, I don't think I'm going to bring astrology to many of the kind of materialistic astronomers of our day and age, and I don't want to force anything on anyone. But if I can bring more of the astronomy to the astrologers of our day and age, then we're doing a wonderful work towards ending the divorce between these two things. So for me, they are these: astronomy, the measurable side of the heavenly happenings. Tomorrow there will be an eclipse, or on December 21st, 2020, if you're into that whole Gregorian calendar trip, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I went to Sedona. I took pictures of it. You know, it was in the sky. I could measure the distance between the two of them using one method or another. Like, it was there. That's the noise. But what is sound? Sound is your experience of that noise. and therefore sound for Anne and sound for Natalie and sound for Christopher and Green Knight and Discerning Light and others who are here with us right now, and those who will be here in the time that we currently perceive to be the future, right? Like the way that you experience a noise will be yours and yours alone. Like sound is very unique, okay? Well, that's correspondences. And astrology is the rainbow bridge between the two, between astronomy, the measurable side of the heavenly happenings, and correspondence is the immeasurable. But it can help us see how the noise will become sound for you. So for example, tomorrow's Libra eclipse is on my Pluto Mercury. I should say Mercury Pluto because it's good grammar to speak the name of the faster moving planet first, but that's beside the point. In my 5th house, what is that going to be for me? And again, like what a great time, eclipse and Pluto to freak out and Libra to try not to and be balanced, right? So it's part of what's alive for us in our talk. But how amazing that we've spent so much time here on Gemini Rising show in a very Libra topic. It's speaking about client relationships. We didn't plan that in any way. Like that just came through. Well, it's a Libra eclipse tomorrow. It makes a ton of sense, right? So anyway, I want to rewind to astronomy and astrology. Were they the same thing? I don't believe so. I think astronomy was born out of necessity, right? So whether you're an agricultural culture and you need to know when to plant and harvest, you better understand the seasons. And working with the phases of the moon can be a great thing to do. But the relationship of Earth and Sun and how that expresses itself where you live on Earth is going to be the most important truth for you to plant and grow food. Or if you're a nomadic peoples, like you better know how the sun dances through the stars and learn how to tell the time if you want to know where to go to that place where the berries are in the bush at that time of the year. The year is an astronomical thing, right? And so as you're like experiencing astronomy through necessity, literally for survival, you have the opportunity to receive more of that, other side, that mystical, immeasurable side. As you tend to, like if you go to a concert, that noise is much more likely to become sound for you, if you get what I'm saying. And so as we're following the moons, as we're tracking time and we're doing astronomy, those who are doing this intently, and it's another reason why I really encourage for people, astrologers, to have a sky practice, like the quote unquote astrology or the correspondences come through. Now, is there any difference between me choosing to find symbols when 4 crows fly west and as I'm out walking the dog? Or I'm consistently adding up the numbers and letters of a license plate. And if it says 11, that might say something different to me than if it said 3. And I'm allowed to make a symbol out of that, right? If I choose to let life story itself and speak to me through these amazing sacred codes, what's wrong with that, right? And so it's really a personal choice. So as far as like astronomical events go, on the prove it to me level, day and night, and then the phases of the moon and learning something about tides because the earth is 70% water and so are you. And then we can get to planets and stars, right? As far as like go have an experience which will help you honor that there is a world behind the world, and the one that you were sold in school that says that seeing is believing and there's no substance to believing and seeing, that's a very personal thing. And it's going to come according to your timings. Were it to be an astronomical event, I would recommend witnessing a solar eclipse because it's just astonishing. And sometimes when we're stuck in like our rigid blocked world, you really need something astonishing to happen. But typically that's going to come more with your own life path. Like I had to kind of hit rock bottom, as I said before, because I did some ridiculous stuff in my life and became something that I grew up hating. And I don't want to get too much more literal than that. Like I had to go to that space where I needed help for then the magical world to show itself to me. Because what was available to me here in this world was not going to be enough. And so it's very tricky, I think, to just say, hey, look to that star. Because once you learn how to look, then I can direct your gaze to Sirius or to Arcturus or to Spica. Or when I bring people out, we have a fourfold practice, or I have a fourfold, it's connection. So first, get out and listen. Smell. Are there crickets? Are there coyote? Are there flowers? Is there wind? Right? Like, become an earthling first and foremost. Like, before you open your eyes to the sky, merge with your mother and open her eyes to the heavens. Right? Then directions. And so we work with the cardinal directions, like according to so many sacred systems. And the truth is, the tropical zodiac, like so many sacred systems of ancient wisdom traditions, is directionally aligned. It's not seasonal. It is not constellational. It is directional. Right? So as we align to the directions, that helps us get into the temple. Then it's reception, then reflection. So I might be going out to see a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. But through my practice, when I'm getting directions, if something happens in the south, and it might be like hawk flies by and then shows me a star I haven't yet met, I'm going to spend some time with that star before I go to do what I ran out there to do. Because that star wants to speak to me, and Hawk told me so. Do you know what I mean? Now, I can suggest that as a method, and my students typically are game, but I can definitely understand if you're not. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm sorry to take another hour to answer a simple question.
No,
but
that's amazing.
Lyrics of my dear friend David J., that's as simple as a flower, and that's a complicated thing.
Oh, Natalie, are you muted?
Yes, I am muted.
Okay. Said no Gemini ever.
Exactly right. Okay, so before we sort of wrap this up, I did want to ask one question, because you've been talking a little bit about Hawaii today. I'm about to go to Hawaii, and it is one of my favorite places on earth. So Broome, where I spoke about earlier, that had I not gotten my visa to come here, I was going to move there, because there is something about that place. But Hawaii, for me, even as a child, I have memories of it feeling magical and feeling connected to that space. And then there are obviously other people that feel a call to India or Sri Lanka, and other people to South America. And I was just curious as to these connections we have to places. In your opinion, do we have these connections based on our astrology? Is it astrocartography, or do you think that is something that's more past life type of things?
Oh, awesome question. I don't think that they have to be separate. If you're someone from like past life modality, then it's very likely, and actually I've seen it in practice. So pointing to a place on Earth that the planets were clearly empowering at the birth moment, and somebody tells me that that's where they've died in a previous lifetime, that they died in Vietnam, or that they had lifetimes in the Himalayas or whatever. So I don't know that they have to be different questions. Like, I still am wondering about past life, is it ancestral? Is it our DNA? There's so many different ways to play with the idea of lineage. Astrocartography is one of many astro mapping models that I utilize. It's a specialty of mine. I love astro mapping, because on one level, it's completely astronomical. And of course, I love this astronomical side of our craft. On another level, in a sea of crazy that astrology offers, the maps take the cake. The weirdest things happen on the maps, So I imagine we'll even see like a thread. It's pretty common connecting Australia through Hawaii to Southern California for you, Natalie. And probably more in local space than astrocartography, which is a very different technique, by the way. The astrocartography itself will tell us where planets were angular, and we've long known that angular planets are powerful. It really, for me, it's just a little glimpse into the power of the relocated chart, which I find to be the crown jewel of astrolocality. So, you know, we correct for time zone and cast the chart in Hawaii in the moment of your birth, and that will say so much. But yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I spend a lot of time counseling people as to the power of place and helping them understand more about the particular initiations they went through in different places on earth, why places feel great, why places feel terrible, why they feel like they are from a place, why they must go, when they should go, those kinds of things, where we should live. Like, I find it to be a very fascinating part of the astrological puzzle. Yeah, and I love that you spend time in Hawaii. And yeah, if you can, while you're there, you know, meet some Hawaiians and see if they'll take you to some of their places too, you know. And there's a lot of like known sacred sites in Hawaii that, if you know, we open right with reference, and it's nice to have guidance when we go, where the teachings are just so available. But as you know, it's just a great place to celebrate this marriage of heaven and earth, and hear the breath of mama and the waves, and connect to the skies. I want to answer one question that was here. Somebody wrote, how much Pisces is in this man's chart? I'm not sure if they were talking about this man, but depending on what you look at, the answer is none, or maybe Vesta and Pallas, if you like asteroid play. Certainly some stars. And for any Gemini rising being, it's the 10th sign. Natalie, I was wondering, do you have an Aries midheaven?
No, my midheaven is Pisces, and I have a stellium in Pisces. I've got Mars, Mercury, Venus, my midheaven, and my south node.
Yeah, so see, y'all, I'm just tapping into that. And I assume an Aquarius midheaven for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so in Southern Hemisphere, Gemini rising, you'll either get a Pisces midheaven, or you'll never get Aquarius. You can get Aries, right? So that brings in kind of a fun thing between the two of you, Gemini rising co-hostesses of this fun place, and one from the Northern Hemisphere and one from the Southern Hemisphere and that. But for all of us, Pisces is the 10th whole sign and the highest part of the chart, which the midheaven is not. It's a lie astrologers tell because they don't know they're lying. Somebody just want to rewind this. So what was the place I mentioned, 4 corners for camping and stargazing? Hovenweep, Hovenweep, magical, like a most magical place. Make sure you check out the bookstore and the visitor center. There's some things there that's hard to find otherwise, and that's a really powerful place. It's close to like Mesa Verde, which is very much like on the map of sacred sites that people visit. But it's a place where you can go and kind of be alone, or be with your people while you're there, just really connect. It's a lovely, amazing power place.
Yeah.
I do just want to say, at some point, Brett, if you're willing to come back and we do a show just talking about the astrocartography and that whole thing, because I know Anne is fascinated with it. We talk about it all the time. Neither of us have enough knowledge in that area to really be able to effectively delve into it. So if you're down for that at some time in the future, we would love to have you back. And
I am down.
Great.
All right. Wonderful. You know, I think we could just sit here and talk all night.
Absolutely.
But obviously, Natalie's got a visiting father who has places to go. So we should probably start wrapping it up. And
it's 3:33. So.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Seems like we win something.
That's right.
So, but we also have questions that we like to ask each guest. So we've got a set of 4 questions. So if you're okay with that, we're going to start asking our wrap-up questions here.
All right, let's see if I can tap into brevity.
All right. So your first one is, what makes you laugh?
Right now, my baby girl, Maya, just turned 15 weeks old, and she's awesome and hilarious, and watching her brother engage with her. But generally, my own idiocy and like the revelations that come through where it's like, oh, that's why that's that, right? Like that's my internal Gemini giggle that keeps me going.
And who was your biggest spiritual influence?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a name, but it's just the temple of the heavens. Yeah, and the spiritual influencer I most often visit, whether I'm looking from light polluted spaces or dark skies, just to try to erase myself and open through the portal of wonder, the magic of the night sky, which surprises me every time. And to make sure as I'm engaging with the heavens that I'm earth, and that I, like when heron flies by, like I understand that that's part of how the heavens are teaching me. So there's been a lot of important teachers in my life, folks who also I will never meet, like Alan Watts. I spent a lot of time in that space, but definitely just the heavens herself, and the embrace of the heavens and the earth.
That's wonderful. So the next question is, what would be your advice to anybody or people in general about how to transcend fear?
Find another teacher. And I think it would be avoid the idea that fear is false emotions appearing real, as many will suggest. There's a reason for it. It's a teacher. It is inviting you to a place where you will be even more you than you are now. So don't run from the tidal wave, but dive through it.
Oh, I like that. And what is the best piece of spiritual advice you have ever been given?
What a huge question. Well, let's respawn for the Gemini Rising show. There was a great line from Tolkien, which is not all who wander are lost. And it was rephrased in a recent TV show, in the Rings of Power or whatever that is, and a beautiful song that I need to hear. But they say, not all who wonder or wander are lost. I think when Gemini is on the rise, that's the best spiritual advice.
That's perfect. I love it. Sounds like a place to stop for today. What do you think?
Thanks so much for inviting me to play in this wonderful place. It's nice to meet you both, and I really feel honored to have this opportunity to connect and to share.
Well, thank you. And we want to also promote where people can find you. So is it GeminiBrett.com or where?
Yeah, it is indeed. And that will lead you to many places. So Gemini Brett with twin T's, 2T's.com. If you want to book a session with me, there's a session page. You'll find a video page. I'm actually sharing this right now to my own YouTube space. So some friends like Aoife, I see you, are coming in from that realm. Every Wednesday, miércoles, Mercury's Day at 11 a.m. Pacific time, I'm live on my YouTube place, exploring whatever feels relevant. So join me there sometime and come find me. And thank you so much for those who haven't seen my work before. To you, Anne, and you, Natalie, for introducing me to your friends.
Well, I would just like to say thank you as well. And I will make sure that the links to your YouTube and your website and everything are in the description below so that people can find you really easily. And I'm very excited about doing part 2 where we can explore the lay of the land.
Yeah. Are you willing to be example charts in that exploration?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure,
yeah,
yeah.
because that it helps it come to life, right? When we can story the thing and not just suppose.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I will see you then.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.